All right, let's get started. Thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Greta Zarro and I'm the organizing director with World Beyond War. And today's webinar is what we're calling our virtual open house to meet chapter coordinators and members from World Beyond War around the world. So this webinar is a little bit different. We're experimenting with regional breakout rooms, and so we'll be dividing you into different breakout rooms based on your geographic location. So hang with us throughout this experience. If by some reason you don't end up in the right breakout room, join the conversation in the room that you end up in. But we are doing our best to make sure that you align with your geographic location. And I want to say thank you to John Pegg, who is one of our chapter coordinators who initiated the idea for this webinar. So thanks, John, for inspiring us to do this today. So first we'll hear from David Swanson, World Beyond War's co-founder and executive director. He'll talk a little bit about what is World Beyond War, why were we founded, what is our mission and theory of change, and also he'll address the current moment with all the issues that we're facing right now as a society. The coronavirus pandemic, issues surrounding Black Lives Matter, climate change that is continually looming. He'll address all of those issues and how we can build a peace movement in this time. And then I'll talk a little bit about starting a chapter and what's involved with coordinating a World Beyond War chapter in your area. And then we'll go into the breakout rooms and we'll have 40 minutes for the breakout room discussions. So some housekeeping items. We are asking you to stay muted right now and you will have a chance to unmute during the breakout room discussions. We're also asking you to update your screen name if you haven't done that yet. Please do make sure to have both your first and last name in your Zoom screen name so that we can be sure to put you in the right room. If you don't know how to update your name, you can just right click on the photo of yourself and then click rename. And we are recording this webinar, so if you have to leave at any time, feel free to leave and we'll send the link to the recording afterwards. We are only recording the main room, so when you go into the breakout rooms, it will just be the main room that is actually recorded. And I think that's all the housekeeping right now, so I want to turn it over to David to get us started.
Great, thank you, Greta. Hope everyone can hear me okay. My name's David Swanson. I'm co-founder of World Beyond War along with David Hart. So about 6 years ago, we started World Beyond War as a handful of volunteers and have grown at an increasingly rapid rate ever since. Greta is our wonderful organizing director, part of our enlarged staff. Mark Elliott Stein, who's on here and working diligently to sort all of you into the proper breakout rooms and make this thing work, is also on our staff. Mark is our tech pro who knows things that the rest of us don't and is redesigning our website to make it look wonderful and has been working on social media and a million other things. We've grown in recent years in staff among many other areas. We have a development director, Alex McAdams. We have a education director, Phil Giddings. Phil's in England, Alex is in Canada. We have a bookkeeper. And we have a board of volunteers chaired by, or the president of, is Leah Bolger, and numerous other board members, increasingly representative of the globe, and an advisory board and a speakers bureau and so on. And as Greta will talk about, a growing number of chapters, increasingly active with individual members or participants or whatever terminology you want to use in more and more places around the world. We started World Beyond War, and I know many of you know a lot of this, and many of you have been a big part of a lot of this, but to fill in those who don't and to remind the rest of us, including myself, we started World Beyond War to create an organization that would be global. There are a lot of peace organizations that are specific to a city, a state, a region, a province, a country. overwhelmingly countries, and we wanted something global. So even though it was a couple of us in the United States starting it, the mission had always been and remains to make it be global and to talk that way. And so it's just so wonderfully beneficial when we have these online courses and we have these webinars and we have these endless nonstop 24/7 Zoom calls at which we've all tried to become professionals in recent months, to have people from around the world on the calls, because I'm always talking with people from the United States and trying my utmost to get them to stop saying we and us and our to refer to the Pentagon, to refer to the United States military. I mean, it's like said a million times, I've gone to jail with people who said, we just bombed such and such city, when we were literally being locked up for protesting the US military bombing that city. And when we have a Zoom call like this and there are people on there from around the world, I don't have to make an ideological argument to stop identifying with the military, for God's sake. I can say people won't understand you. People will not know who we means because there are other human beings in the world outside of that 4% in the United States, and they're on this call. So use we to mean humanity. Use we to mean the community of activists that forms World Beyond War. The second thing that we wanted World Beyond War to be, and which it has been, was an organization that went, in terms of education and in terms of activism, after the entire institution of war. The whole idea of having militaries at all, every war, the good wars, the bad wars, the racist wars, the humanitarian wars, everything, because there is so much counterproductive and insufficiently incremental, if not self-defeating, semi-peace activism, where you argue against this particular weapon because you want the money to go into other weapons that work better. When really you don't, if you stop and think about it for 2 seconds, because those weapons kill more people than the other weapons. I've been on calls recently just in the past couple of days with Congress members and staffers and activists from Washington, D.C. groups, talking about this effort that's now underway, rather unique in recent years, to scale back U.S. military spending. And they almost all talk about it as if the military spending keeps the people of the country safe, but you don't want too much of it. You'll be excessively safe. It's just wastefully. You're too safe. It's too much defense. Never the word military. Always defense. And so there's a different critique of militarism that we try to bring out that says, look, this spending actually endangers us in numerous ways. It generates hostility and terrorism. 95% of suicide terrorist attacks around the world are aimed at ending foreign occupations of countries. There have been exactly 0 terrorist attacks that have come out of resentment at provision of food or clean water or schools. And it's money that's needed to, as the current climate has shown some people so clearly, it's money that's needed to protect people from real dangers, from the dangers generated by militarism, from the dangers generated by environmental destruction, from the risk of nuclear apocalypse, from disease pandemics, from unsafe workplaces, and from the lack of healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. So we started with this ideology, and we started with a peace pledge, with a declaration of peace. And we've had people sign it in 175 countries. We are now finally getting it translated professionally into all the major languages of the world, which we're also doing with all of our flyers and our books and so forth. There was a comment in the chat just now about, if you're a member, how do you become a member? Do you pay a fee, etc.? And of course, you pay every last dollar you have, and your firstborn child, if possible. But no, you just, when we talk about members and participants and supporters, it means people who participate in these calls, who form chapters, who are on our email list, who sign our declaration of peace. Our email list has grown tremendously, but only about half those people have signed the Declaration of Peace. So we encourage that very much. And when you sign it on the website, WorldBeyondWar.org, there are buttons to check for what else you want to do, how you want to be involved. And of course, we welcome donations, and it's small donations and it's recurring monthly donations that people sign up for that are the vast bulk of our funding. We also think that this critique of all militarism, not just a particular war, can be very useful in building a broader movement. Because when you address war and preparations for war and all things militarism and military basing and research as an institutional problem, it's a major part of the environmental problem. It's a major part of the cultural problem in terms of abusing accountability and transparency and pushing against democracy in governments. It's a major cultural force for xenophobia and racism and brutality in societies. It's an incredible drain on resources, which makes allies out of anyone who needs resources for anything decent. And so there are organizing consequences that come out of this critique of war. There are also consequences for the idea that a war can ever be just, because for a war to ever be justified, it would have to not only miraculously do more good than harm on its own terms, but it would have to justify the existence of this institution of war, which does far more damage through the draining of resources than through the wars. So we have been working on education and on activism, and the education includes, now the endless Zoom calls, but also podcasts, webinars, books, online courses. We have an online course starting in a week or so on war and the environment, looking at the connections between these two issues that really aren't two separate issues, and the activism. Look at how activism has been succeeding in the United States and in many other countries in recent weeks around racist police violence, without any election, with nonviolent activism that doesn't compromise and speaks clearly and straightforwardly. You're seeing action out of cities and states and national governments. Here, a bit ago, I had a city council member here in my city in Virginia call me, and we're getting some positive indications that we're going to get our city to take some serious steps on preventing militarized policing. And this is something that's very easy to do anywhere in the world. And so that's an example of a campaign, but there are also campaigns, activist campaigns that we've really been focused on, like divestment of money, public and otherwise, out of weapons, closing bases, putting up billboards, and lots of other campaigns you all have seen. I think in terms of this current climate of activism and the themes that it's brought out, I'd love to give all of you in 3 or 4 minutes, and then I'll be quiet, a preview of an op-ed I've drafted and am working on getting published on this topic, and then you all can give me your critiques and corrections and edits. So this is called "Hey Congress, Move the Money," and this is addressed to a U.S. audience. The past month's activism has changed a great deal. One thing it's helped with is brushing aside the tired old argument over whether government should be big or small. In its place, we have the much more useful argument over whether government should prioritize force and punishment or focus on services and assistance. If we want local and state governments that provide experts in de-escalating conflict, professionals to assist those with drug addictions or mental illness, and skilled experts at handling traffic or responding to various sorts of emergencies, the funding is easily and logically found. It is sitting in the oversized budgets for armed policing and incarceration. At the level of the federal government, an even bigger opportunity exists to move money from institutionalized deadly force to all variety of human and environmental needs. The US government is expected to spend in its discretionary budget for 2021, $740 billion on the military and $660 billion on absolutely everything else. Environmental protections, energy, education, transportation, diplomacy, housing, agriculture, science, disease, pandemics, parks, foreign non-weapons aid, et cetera, et cetera. No other nation spends even half what the United States does on militarism. Russia spends less than 9% and Iran a bit over 1%, using 2019 budgets for this comparison. And the Chinese military, by the way, is about equivalent to US spending on domestic police forces, which doesn't approach US spending on military. US military spending has soared during the past 20 years, and the wars it has generated have proved counterproductive and extremely difficult to end. This focus seems to have done very little to protect anyone from COVID-19, from environmental disaster, from the risk of nuclear disaster, from unsafe workplaces, from all the suffering inflicted by poverty, or from the lack of comprehensive health care. In both houses of Congress right now, amendments to the National Defense Authorization Act are gathering support that would reduce next year's $740 billion budget for militarism by 10% for the purpose of redirecting those funds to wiser purposes. Moving $74 billion would result in a budget of $666 billion for militarism and $734 billion for everything else. Where could the money come from specifically? Well, the Pentagon is the one department that has never passed an audit, but we do have some idea of where some of the money goes. For example, simply ending the war on Afghanistan that candidate Donald Trump promised to end 4 years ago would save a large percentage of that $74 billion. Or you could save almost $69 billion by eliminating the off-the-books slush fund known as the Overseas Contingency Operations Account, because the word wars didn't test as well with focus groups. There's $150 billion per year in overseas bases, many of them bitterly resented, some of them propping up brutal dictatorships. For that matter, there's the military training and funding of oppressive foreign militaries by the US government. There's also such out-of-control weapons buying that unwanted weapons are unloaded onto local police departments. Where could the money go to? It could have a major impact on the United States or the world. According to the US Census Bureau, as of 2016, it would take $69.4 billion per year to lift all US families with children up to the poverty line. According to the United Nations, $30 billion per year could end starvation on Earth, and about $11 billion could provide the world, including the United States, with clean drinking water. Does knowing those figures, even if they're slightly off or wildly off, throw any doubt on the idea that spending $740 billion on weapons and troops is a security measure? So, now here's some statistics I already just told you, but are there perhaps things a country can do to protect itself that don't involve weapons? Moving money from militarism to other investments can be economically beneficial, and certainly all necessary steps to assist people in the transition would cost a small fraction of the money involved. The end.
Thank you so much, David. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about what is a chapter and what our chapters do, and then we'll go into the breakout rooms. So first I will share my screen. Okay, can you see that on my screen? Perfect. All right, so yeah, as David said, we're a decentralized global grassroots network. We have members in 175 countries, and we use members kind of loosely, and it perhaps is a little bit confusing, but when I say that, I mean people from 175 countries who have signed on to our Declaration of Peace. Our Declaration of Peace or Peace Pledge is really the entry point to getting involved with our work and making the commitment to work non-violently for the end to all war and abolishing the institution of war. And this is a map that shows those 175 countries in green where people have signed our Declaration of Peace. And I hope that everyone on this call has signed the declaration. If you haven't, I do encourage you to go to our website, WorldBeyondWar.org, and sign it. So my role as the organizing director is I get to work with all of our volunteers around the world, and it's really exciting for me to help them create events like this one, online events, in-person events when we can, and campaigns in their communities. And so I'm really the assistant that helps whenever they have questions. If it's a technical question about how to use Zoom, if it's an organizing question about, how do I approach my elected official and get them to sign on to this piece of legislation? How do I run a campaign in my community? How do I recruit other people to join? Those are all the questions that I'm happy to help with on a daily basis and to work with our volunteers like you all to do this kind of work in your communities. And our three main campaigns, number one, are peace education, number two, weapons divestment, and number three, closing military bases. So number one, peace education or anti-war education is really the core of what we do. It all started with our book, A Global Security System, An Alternative to War, that really laid out the strategies needed to get us to this world beyond war. And it talks about those three strategies of creating a culture of peace, managing conflict non-violently, and demilitarizing security. And then from our book, really everything else kind of stems out from that. We have online courses, an online study and discussion guide, webinars, podcasts, PowerPoints, fact sheets, all kinds of materials, videos and films. And that's the bulk of what a lot of our chapters do, is to utilize those materials and organize events in their communities, utilizing those materials and spreading awareness about this. And number one, debunking these myths of war and talking about what are the alternatives. And then beyond education, we have our two activist campaigns. So once we've kind of debunked the myths and talked about the fact that we need to get to this alternative place, our two activist campaigns, weapons divestment and closing military bases, are two ways of starting to dismantle the war machine and getting us to that world beyond war. And so we chose these campaigns after many years of strategic planning because we see these as two kind of low-hanging fruits that we can first start to tackle to take the money out of war through divestment and to close the infrastructure that is propping up war, this infrastructure, this network of global military bases around the world. So that's, in a nutshell, really quickly, some of our campaign areas that our chapters work on. And I just put this slide in here quickly. This is, an overview of what is organizing. What are we talking about when we use the term grassroots organizing? And for me, it means building a movement around a certain issue and being strategic about it. So setting clear goals, strategies, and using appropriate tactics to achieve those strategies and goals. And that's something else that I help our chapter coordinators with, is to develop strategies and to do organizing trainings to talk about all of these terms in more depth. And at the end of the day, it's really about using our people power, our power in numbers, to put pressure on key decision makers to do what we want to achieve the world that we want to see. So what is a chapter? If there isn't a chapter in your community, this is how you can get started. You can contact me, and this is what a chapter does. So a chapter organizes at a minimum 4 events per year. Some of our chapters just stick to that minimum. Some do much, much more than that, so it's totally up to you. Some chapters organize every other week or every month, different events. Our chapters help to collect signatures on our Declaration of Peace, which, as I said, is kind of the entry point to getting involved in our work by signing our declaration and making that commitment to nonviolence and to abolishing the institution of war. And our chapters overall help to advance our mission of abolishing war. And then there are many different things that our chapters can decide to do. Some chapters help with translation of materials, translating it from English to their native languages. Some chapters help with researching and writing, for example, our Factsheet series. Some chapters help with fundraising in their communities. And overall, working on events and campaigns and activities focused on those 3 pillars of education, divestment, and bases that we talked about. And so these are some of the benefits that we can provide to chapters. As I was saying, that's really my job, is to be, working one-on-one with the chapter coordinators, to be providing trainings and resources whenever they have questions, trying to find the answer. And if we don't know the answer, connecting them with someone who does know the answer. We also provide free and discounted books and online courses to our chapters. And overall, the benefit of being a World Beyond War chapter is that you're part of this global network. And so we can connect you with, individuals and organizations around the world who are working on similar campaigns as you and sharing your news with this wider global audience through our email list and website and social media. So you're not an isolated, person working on a campaign on your own, but you're part of this global network, and we can support you and provide solidarity in that way. Okay. So these are some photos of some of our chapter coordinators who are on the call today. This is Liz from New Zealand, who is tabling and collecting signatures on our peace pledge. And she's showcasing a World Beyond War t-shirt. This is Barri from Ireland, who is protesting the US military's presence at Shannon Airport in Ireland. And we held our global conference in Ireland last year to draw attention to the fact that the US military is working hand in hand with Ireland and uses Shannon Airport to transport hundreds of thousands of troops to wars in the Middle East. And this is Liz again from New Zealand, who is delivering a petition that she worked on. She collected hundreds of petition signatures opposing New Zealand's proposed multi-billion-dollar plan to buy 4 warplanes. And so she collected all these petition signatures, and we were able to use World Beyond War's Action Network platform to host the petition. And then here she is delivering the petition with lots of supporters holding signs. And this is our Japan chapter, Joe on the left, and he hosted a photography exhibit and a lecture about Japan's manufacturing of poison gas in the 1930s. So it was a really interesting event where he brought in this photographer who got to put up his photography and showcase this expose about Japan's role in manufacturing poison gas and gave a lecture. This is our chapter in Berlin, Heinrich, holding one of their solidarity protests in support of Venezuela, and they do these protests on a pretty regular basis. You can see that they've translated World Beyond War into German and made their own banner. This is our Philadelphia chapter, and what they did is they hosted a book talk with a local author who was discussing his book called Political Mind Games. And so they attracted a pretty large audience for this book talk. And then after the talk, they were able to talk about their work as a chapter working to divest Philadelphia from nuclear weapons. And this is our chapter in Spain, Tim Pluta, who's on this call today, and they're wearing their blue peace scarves in solidarity with the Afghan peace volunteers, and they're holding up a copy of World Beyond War's book. And so one of the things that they did when they first started their chapter was to read the book together to start discussing these concepts and kind of get on the same page and as I said, kind of debunk the myths of war and sort of, maybe break down some of our own myths and stereotypes that we might have about the war system. And so they used our book and our study guide to have a discussion group. This is our Vancouver chapter. We also have FurCon on the call today, and they held this event with Tamara Lawrence to talk about the environmental footprint of war and how war is one of the leading causes of climate chaos. And this is our South Georgian Bay chapter. Helen is also on today's call. And this was, I think, over a year ago when they hosted their kickoff event. So that's just a very brief slideshow and discussion of some of the activities that we do. And now we're going to break into the discussion groups. All right, Mark, are you ready for us to go into the discussion groups?
Yes, so some people will be, please give it about a couple of minutes before really beginning in your groups, because I am still assigning people to the groups. Most of you, I think, will find yourself in a group. And if you don't, just please hang on. And I'm going to open them right now. This is a particular thing we haven't done before. So again, you can reach us through chat if there's any confusion, and we'll see you in your breakout rooms. I'm going to start it right now.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah.
Am I supposed to be alone in a room called 13, or am I supposed to be in the main room as planned?
Stay in the main room, just hit later.
Yeah, could you exit that room?
Well, I did.
And
that's why you hear me and see me.
yeah, great. We have a large room here, but I think we should use this as a breakout room, because I don't think I can assign people once the rooms are created.
Okay. Well, let's, shall we try to do very brief introductions, everybody who's here in this room? Maybe I can unmute it. Well, we got 47 people in this room.
Yeah. Oh, I want to make sure I get Tim into his room. Tim, you're supposed to be in a room, right? Let me just, but yes,
think,
please
Greta?
go
Can we unmute 47 people?
I think it's room 2, David.
You'll have to talk to Mark. I have no powers here. He's got the controls.
Oh, sorry, David. Mark. I meant Mark.
Yep, I'm trying, Tim. Okay.
Thanks.
Well, we've got 40 minutes and over 40 people, none of whom, including myself, can do an introduction in less than a minute. So I'm going to suggest, and howls of protest can follow, but I'm going to suggest that we go straight into a discussion of things you're working on, things you want to be working on, questions you have about forming a chapter and getting started and joining a chapter and finding a chapter and so on. So I think we can do raise your hand. I mean, Zoom function, raise your hand. Can we not, Mark?
Yes, we can. And by the way, I am still assigning a few people that I'm able to move. So some people may still be moving, but okay, yes,
great.
Go ahead, David.
Well, I would, but nobody is raising their hand. If anyone, Terry, let's see, Terry, I'm going to try my damnedest to unmute you, Terry. No, you are unmuted. Please speak up, Terry.
By pressing the space bar for a second. And I'm in New York, just hoping that I find some other people from New York.
Okay, great. I'm sure that you can, and Greta can help you do so after the call. And you know, and anywhere that there's not yet a chapter, you can take the initiative to start creating one, and we can work with you to set up an initial meeting or event, try to make it an exciting event, and invite everybody that's on our email list in the area, and figure out other ways to spread the word and invite more people. And create a new chapter. It doesn't have to be led just by you, but you could form a team of people to handle it. Okay, we got lots of hands showing up now. Susan Shaw, go ahead.
Is there a Bay Area chapter, Oakland, Berkeley, California area?
Yeah, I guess I should have memorized the list of chapters. I don't think so. Greta can answer, who's on here, and our website can answer. I don't think so, but there are lots and lots of people from the Bay Area involved, working with us on our email list, on our board, on our advisory board, one of our co-founders, the one who's not me, etc. So it would be quite easy to start up an active, lively, well-populated Bay Area chapter that could work in collaboration with existing Bay Area peace groups that are there, that I've gone and spoken at many times, and we would love it if you wanted to be part of that.
Well, my next question is, there was in the 70s, 80s, and 90s an organization called Beyond War that then morphed into Foundation for Global Community. Is World Beyond War an offshoot of that, or what was the relationship?
None whatsoever, except that brilliant people come up with similar names for their organizations with those that other brilliant people have had in the past. And of course, there are people who know people who know people who were involved in that, and we've seen their materials, and we've heard that question that you just gave us dozens of times since we created World Beyond War. But I had never heard of Beyond War when we created World Beyond War. Let's see. Barbara Ween.
Just some technical things before we continue, because we're getting some questions. So to raise your hand, click on participants and then click raise hand. So that's how you raise your hand, participants, then raise hand. And if you're not in the right room, we do have Mark working to put you in the right room. If you can't get in the right room for some reason because of a technical issue, please just join us in this room and have the discussion here, and just try to be flexible that technology doesn't always work. And so you can join the conversation with David, and we can certainly connect you with the appropriate chapter in your area afterwards. Thanks. Go ahead, David.
Barbara Ween, I think I lowered your hand. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. It's lovely to make your acquaintance. It's really powerful to be in community with you, even virtually. So thanks to World Beyond War for convening all of us. I teach alternatives to war and violence at American University. We have one of the largest peace studies programs in the United States at the undergraduate level. What I'm working on right now is to try and ensure that we do protective nonviolent peace teams for young brothers and sisters who are being threatened by the far right. So I've spent my day trying to organize nonviolent peace teams to go to Fredericksburg today. Fredericksburg, Virginia. I think, David, you've probably heard there's going to be a huge, massive alt-right rally there tomorrow. They're promising to make Charlottesville look puny by comparison. Have you gotten word of that where you are, David?
No, I don't know much about it. Sorry.
Yeah,
it's great that you're still doing that work.
Yeah, they're calling it Back the Blue. So it's Unite the Right and Blue Lives Matter coming together to have a huge show of force with lots of guns in Fredericksburg, Virginia tomorrow. But I haven't heard anything about it in the mainstream press. It's only apparently on social media, and young people are talking about it, and young African Americans and Black Lives Matter folks have been told by the FBI to stay home, stay in their homes, and the mayor is actually leaving town, is what the latest is.
Yeah.
This relates to the work I did with Peace Brigades International, everyone, for those of you who don't know about it. peace brigades, nonviolent peace force, these other groups send in unarmed teams to war zones to protect people from the death squads.
Glad you're doing that, Barbara. And glad you're working with us in many different ways with our books and education efforts too. Let's see if anybody has questions about starting up chapters. Julia Smucker, go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm in Maine. As far as I don't know of any chapter in my area. If there is, or if one gets started, I'd be very interested in joining one. But I'm also very unconfident of my ability to start things. But I'm really interested in the idea of economic conversion of weapons manufacturers. You know, you may know that Maine is home to Bath Iron Works, which is a large manufacturer of Navy warships. And you know, they've been in the news recently for COVID outbreaks, and now there's a union there that's on strike. And anyway, I've heard vaguely of kind of a conversion campaign, but it's not very well publicized, and I haven't been able to really get connected with it. But I would be interested in finding ways to get involved with something like that.
Yes, so everybody's going to be asking, is there a chapter in my area? So I've got the website now open. If you go to WorldBeyondWar.org/find chapter, you can find a chapter. And
right, yeah, and can I say, I have tried to use that feature, and I found it really hard to use on that map to zero in on the right location.
Well, we do have Mark, who's on this call, redesigning our website, and one of my dreams is that we will have a simple list alongside of every map for everywhere that we have a map. But we will. Mark has heard your complaint, so we will work on it. There is not a chapter yet in Maine. We need one. There are many longtime friends and allies in Maine, predating World Beyond War. Bruce Gagnon, who's there in Maine with his group, Global Network Against Weapons and Militarization of Space, has partnered with us and collaborated with us on many things. And his partner there, Mary Ellen, whatever in the world her last name is, I'm horrendously sorry, is, you know, one of the best advocates and experts on conversion that I know of. But there is now talk in the US Congress and in other governments around the world about conversion in a way that there hasn't been for decades. Of course, there was action at the state level in Connecticut and other states some years back now, planning for conversion when there was this pretense that U.S. military spending was going to dry up, which was simply a scheme to increase U.S. military spending. But there are lots and lots of people in Maine, people who are working on Lisa Savage's campaign and others who would be eager to help with starting a chapter if someone, you know, got the ball rolling. So talk with Greta after this if you think you might want to be part of a team that got something like that started. And yes, support the strikers at Bath Iron Works. Paul Anders, go ahead. Paul Anders, are you there? Now, do I have to find you again and unmute you, maybe?
Okay, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. In the Beyond War book, A Global Security System, there is a terrific section on create a nonviolent civilian-based defense force. And in 1995, the Albert Einstein Institution worked with the former defense minister of Lithuania to come up with a draft treaty It's called the Treaty on Cooperation in Civilian-Based Defense between Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. And that was in 1995. Well, at the time, those countries had recently gained their independence from the Soviet Union, and they were very interested in joining NATO. So I think primarily for that reason, this treaty didn't go anywhere. But that was 25 years ago, and it's my thought that there should be another attempt on a treaty of cooperation in civilian-based defense, but this time not between just Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, but including any country that was interested. So I guess a step to this would be for individual members of World Beyond War to investigate a particular country like Taiwan, for example, or not exactly a country, but Hong Kong, or maybe those original Baltic countries, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, and try to get someone interested in those countries, or in any country that you were interested in, to sign on to a treaty for nonviolent civilian-based defense. An initial step would be to revise the treaty and bring it up to date. Also,
it's a wonderful idea. I don't think it's exactly one that we've heard before. At least I haven't. So please contact us after this, and we can talk about it further. There are peace groups and maybe some people on this call who can speak up from the Baltic states that are organizing regional efforts for peace there. And I do highly recommend that people learn about the nonviolent creative approaches that were taken when those countries left the Soviet Union. You can go to singingrevolution.com to watch a film about the singing revolutions that they had. But I do think that, yeah, you know, obviously moving the world toward the use of nonviolent protectors and peacemakers rather than armed forces of nations or of the United Nations is badly needed, and it can come through reforming the United Nations, moving them towards nonviolence, or perhaps, as you say, through a new treaty that we could start organizing around the world. And I think it would be a wonderful idea. The book, by the way, for everybody is World Beyond War's book, AGSS, A Global Security System. I'm glad it helped inspire some new thoughts. Let's go to either Tom Nielsen or Lynn Waldron or both of them. Maybe I have to unmute you and then lower your hand. Let's.
Right. Well, we're in Western Mass in Greenfield. We're very active with the Resistance Center, the Latin American Solidarity Groups. We do a number of educational programs with most of the focus is with Venezuela. We do standouts and vigils, demonstrations, and certainly in contact with our U.S. rep. What else? Oh, this Wednesday we have a gathering on this, in Northampton, again, an educational event about the annexation going on in Palestine. Barbara and I hope to work together down at American. One of the things I do is a lot of college programs. In fact, I can get grants from the Musicians Union to bring me in to help do educational programs. I do sermons, primarily Unitarians. So that's a lot of the work that we do here.
And I want to pipe in and say that we're especially appreciative of David recognizing the power of folk music in this movement. And having us at Toronto was a high point for me, being able to support your efforts through the music too.
And it's Mary Beth Sullivan in there.
There you go, Sullivan. There's a name I couldn't think of. Mary Beth Sullivan there in Bath, Maine. I am appreciative of those of you who produce powerful folk music. It doesn't take much to to appreciate it, and we will try to help spread it around because it is very powerful and needed in our movement. So keep making it, and
Lots of material.
Yeah. And I'll just say too that Lisa Savage in Maine, who is running against Susan Collins, reached out to Tom and asked, with Bruce Gagnon, asked him to write a campaign song for Lisa Savage. So he has done that. So.
Very, very nice. Good. We should, and we need to have more music at more events of more chapters. Let's go to Malik Earl, and I will try to unmute, and then I will try to lower hand, see if that works. Malik, go ahead. Maybe it doesn't.
Everyone can unmute themselves, so should be able to unmute.
Well, I can ask to unmute again, or I can refrain from doing anything, but he's muted.
David, can you tell us about divestment, divesting the money?
I can, sure. If Malik ever manages to unmute, he can jump in, and then in a minute I will jump back to the list of people waiting in line here. But you know, divestment is one of the main focuses we've taken because it's important, it's active, it has an impact, and it's educational, and it's achievable. So it helps to build a movement that can then move on to other things. And if you go to WorldBeyondWar.org/divest, or you speak with Greta Zarro, who's here on this call, you can learn all about it. But it's taking money, investment, stock ownership out of weapons. So here in my city, we went to our city council with a resolution that said take all public money out of fossil fuel producers and weapons dealers, and they agreed, and they did it. They did it with their operating budget. Getting it done with their retirement fund is a whole nother long, endless bureaucratic nightmare, but we're working on it. But it's doable, and in the process, you're able to educate the city council and the people who come there, and the local media and local organizations and people that you organize and reach through media and events about why it ought to be shameful to be profiting from mass killing, from weapons dealing, to your own government and the rest of the world's governments. And you know, it's something more of an issue depending on what part of the world you're in. There are many countries around the world where nobody's making any weapons to speak of. There are others where a great deal are being made. 3/4 of international weapons dealing is from the United States, and the big, permanent members of the UN Security Council with veto power over international affairs are the big weapons dealers. Then the places where the wars are hardly make any weapons at all. So it's something that's exported from the wealthy north to the poor south, that's then blamed for it. And if you go after local weapons, domestic weapons, guns on the street, and weapons of war, and fossil fuels, and you make the connections between all of them, and people understand the environmental and peace connections between these movements, you accomplish a great deal educationally in the process of getting a resolution through. And of course, because it's popular and enlightened to be environmentalist, and it's a little bit shady to be for peace, you're more likely to succeed when you combine these issues. So anyway, that's a start. We could go on for hours, but let's see if we can try Neovi. If you're capable of unmuting. And
yeah, hi everybody, I just did.
Go ahead.
So can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay. So I'm from Vancouver. I am the president of Global Peace Alliance. I'm also a member in the Vancouver chapter of your group. And I guess I have a big concern in that as much as the work we're doing is important, we're not really getting at the issue. And I'm going to put it into the chat for people to have a look at right now. So my concern is, are we addressing who exactly is benefiting from war and who is creating war and why? Unless we can answer those questions and expose the people who are behind the policies and the people who influence governments and the power, obviously it's the people with money, the power elite. And I was horrified after watching a documentary called Influence, and I've listed it there for people to have a look at. It is really scary in that it exposes that these companies, these huge companies that run elections or help in electing governments that will benefit other governments, are doing all the dirty work and creating the wars. And this movie clearly shows how they influence the masses and the media. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about that if you can. I would like to, like I said before, we can petition till the cows come home, but I guess I don't want to be disheartening people, but at the same time, I think it's really important to understand who's creating foreign policy and who's behind all these wars and why. Obviously, it's for profit, and we need to expose the people that are behind it.
Well, I can't speak to this movie Influence, but I very much appreciate the recommendation, and we'll go find it and check it out and learn about it and see if we can recommend it to our chapters and participants, as we've done with many other great movies. It was a little unfortunate that you were waiting so long to ask that question, and then the question just before you was about the weapons dealers, because you know, we're not being completely silent about who's benefiting and who's running the show when we're talking about the weapons dealers, who are a huge part of it, who own national governments, who set the policy for officials determining foreign affairs. It's largely a matter of the profits of arms dealers. It's not exclusively, it's not the one secret discovery that explains everything. I don't think you can explain decisions to prepare for wars and momentum building for wars and decisions to go into wars without all kinds of political and profit and irrational, insane cultural factors. There's a whole toxic stew that makes it happen, but without the profit, without the money being made off war, we would have quite an easy path toward ending it. I think it's also important for people to understand that the more we learn about the cynicism and the greed and the evil profiteering of those who will take countries to war, and it's maybe a teachable moment here for people in my country to learn this, because they have a government that's eager to sacrifice their lives to a disease in the exact same way that it's always been so eager to sacrifice everybody else's lives abroad. But the more you learn about this, it doesn't spell discouragement or the need not to act any longer. It simply means you're better informed about what you're acting against. And the reason that we're able to stop various wars and stop various war rehearsals in recent weeks and stop various weapons shipments and weapons sales and expose various war criminals, and the reason Iran hasn't been attacked yet by the United States, and the reason Syria wasn't carpet bombed several years ago, is because of peace activists, because activism works. Again, the biggest accomplishment of the anti-racist, anti-militarized police activism of recent weeks is the clear demonstration to people of how well activism works, and how ridiculous are the corporate claims that powerful interests don't pay attention to it, don't answer to it, don't respond to it. Will only be impacted by sitting on your butt until it's time to vote for the less horrendous of a couple of them. Activism works, and whether we're going to succeed or not, whether the world is going to go up in nuclear flames or not, whether the climate collapse can ever be restrained or not, is completely irrelevant to the need to do our damnedest toward those ends, which is far more enjoyable and fulfilling than sitting around griping about it. There's nothing more enjoyable, especially if you get Tom or somebody else to bring some music to the event. There is nothing more that builds a better community to live in than acting as strategically as you can for the greatest good you can, and then we'll see what happens. Let's try Sue.
Hello, Malik is here. Hello, can you hear me?
Malik, you're here, and Sue, I'm sorry I lowered your hand, but please speak up after Malik. Malik, go ahead.
Thank you, David. Greetings all, and I've really enjoyed being with you in this call, and I love the idea of being an advocate for peace, and of course I'm an activist, and I certainly believe in anti-war rallies and standing up and even shouting. It's something really cathartic about being in a rally like Black Lives Matter recently, where I got up and spoke, which was kind of scary for me, and I'm glad I did it. And the power of yelling, even expressing rage in a crowd, is really quite a powerful experience physically that I think is quite healthy for us to express our rage by yelling. But what inspired me to call is I've been wanting to reach out to you, David, and invite you and anybody you want to bring to come down to the river at Meditation Rock. Who I am, when people ask me who I am lately, I say I'm a midwife, or I was saying I'm a midwife in training, but now I kind of claim it. And people go, oh, they assume I help women and families birth new children. I said, no, I'm actually a different kind of midwife. I'm a midwife to the more beautiful world your heart and my heart knows is possible. And that is a world beyond war. Come,
very good.
Join me in that place. Come play with me by the river to the shrine. I call this place that I want to invite you to a shrine.
This the Ravenna River?
Yes. So it's really easy.
Okay. Well, we have all been in the Ravenna River plenty around here since they closed all the swimming pools. But email me and we'll.
Okay, I will. But the thing is, for everybody, is the idea is, can you find in your area? So this is a challenge to everybody on the call. Can you find an area in your part of the world that is beautiful, that is an example, hopefully, probably in nature, whether it's forest or river or lake or stream or ocean. To be in nature is healing and powerful. And what are we fighting for? And it is this beautiful world.
Very good idea.
So anyway.
And take a picture of yourself there and send it to us with a statement and maybe a World Beyond War shirt on when you do it.
Okay.
Yeah, spread the word. Can Sue, I think I lowered your hand a minute ago. Are you able to unmute?
Yes, I'm here, thanks. I guess Malik is singing the song, Ain't Gonna Study War No More, right? Going down to the river to bathe. Ain't gonna study war
Wade
no
in
more.
water.
Going down
No,
to
I
the river.
ain't gonna. I ain't gonna. You're right.
Ain't gonna study war no more. Anyway, I just wanted to say I'm just absolutely delighted to see this organization growing. For years I've been saying, whatever happened to the peace movement? And I think actually one of the things that happened was that the draft was ended. And so it wasn't a lot of middle-class children who were being sent off to war, but a lot of people who just desperately needed jobs and would take even being warriors over being broke and unemployed. But anyway, in fact, what I was on a practical level, what I was thinking, I don't think I have the bandwidth to start a chapter here in Toronto, but I might be able to get something going if I were to talk to the groups that I do belong to, like the Labor Council and various climate groups. I think it's, these days activism is really coming together. We call it intersectionality, right?
Yes.
And so if there were some way maybe for existing groups to endorse World Beyond War, and maybe that might lead to the growth of a chapter. I see there is one in Southern Ontario in Mississauga, which is not far from where I am.
Yeah.
But maybe if, I don't know whether World Beyond War has done this, sort of working with, as I say, local already existing activist groups like the Labor Council and
Yes.
climate group, climate coalitions and
Yes.
Greenpeace.
Yes.
And
So we as you may know, we had our conference in Toronto a couple of years ago, and we're to have our conference in Ottawa this year, made it virtual, or having it there next year. We're also hiring an organizer for Canada right now, who's going to be working with all the different organizations around Canada that are getting together and trying to build something bigger and stronger together. The organizations can, and many hundreds have, signed our peace pledge, our declaration of peace. If you go to WorldBeyondWar.org and click where it says sign, you can sign as an individual or an organization. Existing organizations that have local chapters doing this kind of work can join as affiliates and work with us just as our chapters work with us, but under their own banner as their own organization that's already existing. And any other possible form of collaboration or joint enterprise that you can imagine, we are open to and probably already engaged in and eager to expand further. Yes, absolutely. And there are many people in and around Toronto who would be eager to join with you if you want to talk with Greta about starting up some new event or initiative or petition or webinar. I think it's a place where there's a lot of interest and a lot of excitement. Maybe if we have time, we'll come back to it a little later, but be careful what you wish for with drafts. Alan.
Oh, no, I'm not suggesting restarting the draft. Not at all. No.
Glad to hear it, because there's a certain insane country to your south that is expanding it to women as a question of women's rights, and so there is a
no. I'm not suggesting it. I'm just saying that in terms of real politics, that may be partly the cause for the
that is absolutely, of course, obviously part of it, but a small part of it, also a question of the wars and who was dying and the media coverage and how it reflects things and so on. But yeah, Alan Ware, go ahead. If you can,
Alan, you'll be the last person in this breakout room, and then after Alan, we're going to transition to a main room discussion again. Everyone from their breakout rooms has now joined us in this room.
Okay, thanks so much, David. And hello, everyone from Prague. I left New York just before the lockdown. So I've been hanging out for the pandemic over here in Czech Republic. And my sympathies with everyone in the United States for like a disaster from the incompetence of President Trump and the administration there, and it's just mind-blowing, sort of the disaster there has been in the United States. And all the more important, the work of World Beyond War, which is demonstrating the importance of working on human security and peace, and practical ways of both educating people and also of challenging those who have vested interests in wars, which is the arms industry. So my commendations to World Beyond War, to you, David, and Greta, and for everybody. I just had a couple of little thoughts for the chapters, and on both the education and also the celebration. And you mentioned, Dave, before, sort of, having music for the cause is really good. In terms of education, I think the video, the documentary, A Bolder Peace, about Costa Rica, is a fantastically educational documentary that can help people who feel insecure about giving up the army, that you can actually be better off, that you can resolve your conflicts with neighboring countries, even in a very difficult region, which was where Costa Rica was. Costa Rica abolished their army in 1949. They have been the lead of diplomacy and disarmament since then, and it's because they abolished their army that they brought into their public policy and their consciousness non-violence as the approach to international relations, and it shows it can work. So I would recommend that as a documentary, as a wonderful educational tool for your chapter. And then for the celebration side of music, Roger Waters from Pink Floyd, who's a supporter of the nuclear weapons divestment campaign, Move the Nuclear Weapons Money, has just re-recorded his the Pink Floyd's classic anti-nuclear, anti-war song, Two Suns in the Sunset. They recorded in the pandemic, so they had to, have their artists in different studios. It's a beautiful new recording of Two Suns in the Sunset. It's very poetic, and that's a wonderful musical thing that you can use also as part of your education campaign, and also to demonstrate that what World Beyond War is doing is not just amongst the peace activists. It's actually something which has been picked up by people out in the broader world of, the celebrities and musicians and artists and things like that. And I think that helps also give people confidence that these ideas have validity. They're not just ideas held by peace movement people, they're ideas held by people with common sense. And Roger Waters, maybe, you might want to bring him on board World Beyond War, because he's got a huge social media network also, to advance his ideas. And that in his concerts, he's attacking the military industrial complex and calling on people to resist it. So I think he'd be sort of, probably quite open to becoming engaged. Thanks.
Thanks, Alan. I don't know him, so we would be happy, I think, to invite him to participate in some way if you put me in touch with him.
Sure.
All right, thank you, everyone. We are now going to transition to brief report backs, and I will call on some of our chapter coordinators to share with me and with all of us some of the highlights from their conversations. And I want to thank everyone for bearing with us during this experimental regional breakout group. I know that not all of you ended up in the right rooms, but we can still connect you with the members that are in your region via email afterwards. So do be sure to email us at info@WorldBeyondWar.org, and we can make sure to connect you with people in your area. You can also find a chapter in your area by going to WorldBeyondWar.org/find-chapter. And if there isn't one in their area, you can just click a link that's on that page that says start a chapter of my own, and it will tell you all the steps involved with starting a chapter. So now I will call on some of our chapter coordinators to share some highlights from their discussions. Let's hear from Al Mitty from Florida. Al, you can now unmute.
Thank you for giving me time to prepare. We had 6 wonderful people in our group. Three of us, I believe 3 of us were from Florida. 4 of us were from Florida, and 1 from Wisconsin and 1 from Norway. And we spent a lot of time, we talked about the resources that World Beyond War has available, and encourage folks to go to the website to look at those kinds of things. And we talked about why folks are interested in this, and in particular, Regine, and I may be mispronouncing her name, from Norway, is interested in how she can get something going in Norway. We had Barry Dyer from Sarasota, Florida, mention his association with Veterans for Common Sense in the United States, and how that organization can link with other veterans organizations and with World Beyond War. So I think there seemed to be a consensus that the premise of World Beyond War, that the institution of war needs to be abolished, is solid. Let's work on that. Let's do away with war, because there are much better ways of resolving conflicts domestically and internationally. So.
Thanks, Al. Okay, Alex McAdams, who is our development director, was leading one of the discussion groups. Alex, you can now unmute.
Hi, everyone. I actually moved between two different groups, so I'm just going to give a quick, although there was some overall a consensus around themes and talking about the work of World Beyond War and people wanting to connect with other people in their regions, talk about intersectional issues at the root of war and abolishing war, and working with different sectors of issues and people working in different realms. We had a lot of talk about divestment. There are people that are working on divestment campaigns, particularly one with the Catholic Church that was really interesting, that is ongoing. And yeah, so we just sort of talked about our experiences and backgrounds, and yeah, between the two groups. It was New England, and then a lot of people from sort of all over.
Thanks, Alex.
Sure.
Okay, Barri, you can now unmute.
Yeah, thanks, Greta. We had a nice chat, although time is never long enough, I would say. Just to summarize a few of the main points, a few things came up. We had 6, 7 people in the meeting room. 5 or 6 of them were from Ireland. And militarization of Europe came up, and how little is really understood about it in Ireland, and that this is something that needs to be addressed. The Occupied Territories Bill and the newly formed government came up as well. We discussed that. There's also a Citizens Assembly in Ireland, which is a very exciting vehicle, which we really need to consider in detail how we can work with this and use this, because it gives the public a voice. Ireland, of course, was just there last week, elected to the United Nations Security Council. So that came up as a point, that this is now a vehicle for education, to point out, are we really neutral? What's really happening in Ireland? What do we really want our country to stand for? We now have a platform to be an international player for the next number of years, so that's another angle that we'd like to work on. And then also it came up just the arms industry in Northern Ireland, converting that to renewable industry, and converting industry also came up. It was a very good first chat. I think the overall feeling I got from it was there's a lot of energy, there was a lot of expertise. I'm really happy to have connected with all these people, and we discussed now beginning to meet up for monthly meetings or some, the details are still to be worked out, but it was a really good platform to have a chat, and I think it was quite productive.
Thanks, Barri. Okay, next we have Dari from California. You can now unmute.
Hello, everyone. Hi. So there were 9 of us in our breakout room in California, and it was so wonderful for me to be introduced to these other individuals, so much long time experienced peace activism. So I was really humbled, and we basically went around and did a little bit of thorough introductions, which I was awestruck, and I'm really not very experienced at watching the clock these days. So we didn't move into next steps necessarily, but I am really excited about getting together again with this group and discussing what in Southern California we've been talking about and working on in our chapter. There were members in Northern California and in San Diego, Palm Desert, and I would really, really like to get together again and just continue our discussion. So thank you.
Thanks, Dari. Okay, Helen Peacock and Melissa Wheel from South Georgian Bay and Ontario chapter. Helen, you can unmute.
Melissa, where are you? I would say that we talked a great deal. We had maybe about 12 people, and we talked quite a bit about intersectionality and the kind of this is a pivotal moment, what with the climate change and Black Lives Matter and #MeToo and all the various movements that are happening in this moment. And Meta was in our group, and she mentioned her website, tosavetheworld.ca, which looks at 6 of these global threats, none of which we all know that none of them will be solved in the barrel of a gun. And so she's looking on her website. So that's a reference for everybody. One of our younger members talked about using LAC, L-A-C, which some of you might be familiar with, which they have used a lot for the climate crisis. I see Greta nodding her head. So, and that would be a tool that we might be able to make use of. And then Melissa talked about how we in Ontario are having, have started, we've only had one, but we started to have monthly phone calls. So you can call in, I think it's the last Wednesday of the month, I'm not sure. Are you there, Melissa? Anyway, at the end of the month. So if you're interested in calling in and you're living in the Ontario area, or Quebec, or New Brunswick, or Nova Scotia, because we had all of Eastern Canada in our call. I think that's
Thursday nights.
The last Thursday of the month. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next we have John Pegg. You can now unmute.
Looks like, am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay. Well, our experience in the Midwest was similar to Al's in Florida, and we only had about a half dozen people, and there are only 3 of us from Minnesota in that room, several of the people were kind of newcomers to World Beyond War and peace work, interested in learning about it. So we talked some about that. And I'll also say that the other member of our chapter, Penny Cragen, who was going to be the note taker for our session, never made it to our room. So I'm kind of winging it here. There was some good energy around 2 others, Joel and Molly, who are both near the Twin Cities, within an hour or so of the Twin Cities, and I will be moving to the Twin Cities in August. So we're hoping to reconnect and find ways to bring some energy to World Beyond War in the Twin Cities. The one issue I would say that probably got the most resonance on was military spending, and how that so deeply impacts, robs us of being able to respond to the other very pressing issues that we're all facing. So wanting to raise a strong voice about that. That's my report.
Thanks, John. And just a technical tip, if you're ever doing breakout rooms in the future, for those of you who didn't make it into your room, make sure to click the blue button that says join room. So when the breakout rooms are opened, a little box pops up and it asks you to join the room. If you don't actually click that blue button, you won't make it into your room. And I think that's what happened for some folks. So keep that in mind next time we do a webinar with breakout rooms. And now we are just about out of time, but we have 3 more chapter coordinators that I want to call on to give short report backs, and then we'll wrap up. So Furkan, you can now unmute.
Okay, yeah, sorry, something happened there. Yeah, so we had about 10 people in our room. There were a couple from Victoria, and I connected both of them to Bill Reimer so they can work with him. There were a couple of people from Saskatchewan, and they may reach out to you at some point, Greta, about starting a chapter in Saskatchewan. So we talked about the divestment resolution that is in progress here locally in the city of Langley area. We're making good progress on that and hoping we can actually get a resolution in soon. And there were a few local people in the Vancouver area that were also part of the room, and invite them to get more involved in the chapter. And we also had some organizing committee members. One interesting point I'll just bring up is that one of the common things that a lot of us are seeing is we're assuming people in the general public know this information. And I've been assuming that myself for a long time, but we're finding out, and maybe some of you already know this, but a lot of people don't have a clue that this stuff is going on. So education is a big thing that we need to push for and continue. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. Most of our chapters start out with that first campaign of peace education, just as you're saying, to start just talking about these issues, because these issues are not addressed in the mainstream media. So it really does start out with debunking those myths of war and those assumptions. Next, I'll call on Liz Remerswall. Liz, you can now unmute yourself.
Hi, kia ora everyone. Hi from Aotearoa, New Zealand. We had a smallish group with Deborah and John from Christchurch and also Beacon from Bangladesh. And so hopefully, Greta, you can help Beacon connect with other people in Bangladesh. I think that would be really interesting. So we talked about links that we have with other organisations such as the Quakers, who in Christchurch are doing a bit. Deborah actually has a long time activist, and she's very good at writing letters and making signs and going out and hanging out in front of shopping malls and getting the message out about the increase in military spending. And both she and John had done the last 2 courses of World Beyond War, so they're very well informed. We talked about that. And John has also links with the Quakers and the Catholic worker movement, who are of course very active in the peace movement. So we talked about what we could plan for this year, maybe the possibility of, with the upcoming 75th anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I'm working with some people about creating some peace film series online. We also talked about the campaign to create a ministry of peace, and it's lovely to see Alan Weir on this call and his amazing work. We've got an election coming up, so that's something we need to think about. And also we've been very involved here with the Cancel RIMPAC campaign, which is the war games in the Pacific outside Hawaii, and 26 countries and thousands of troops, although it's been changed by COVID, but it's still hugely not good for the local people and very damaging for the environment, particularly marine animals who are affected by what goes on. They bomb ships and things like that. So we just really talked about the importance of working together and making our voice known. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Okay, I will call on one last chapter coordinator. Lori, you can now unmute, and then we will wrap up.
Okay. Yes, so we were 7 to 8 people, and from all over the middle eastern United States, Maryland, Fairfax, Virginia, We had people from Kentucky. And so Bridget, she shared her lived experience of visiting Palestine and making the connection of how a society evolves when it becomes militarized. It becomes like a police state. So this is what we're trying to avoid. And then we had two people that are also connected with WILPF, so another peace organization. And with that, there were a number of people who are mobilizing and gearing up for the 75th anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So kind of the importance of, having those dates to for activism. And the other thing that got mentioned in Baltimore was putting attention on weapons. In this case, Johns Hopkins, which you would think it's a university, so receives $1 billion and is connected with the nuclear industry. So they're doing efforts to, bring that to light. So it was kind of like a networking and information sharing of key events coming up to focalize with. And then what I shared was as starting a new chapter and focusing on the peace education, really wanting to both study the AAGFF, and to have that be the focal point to mobilize people to start to disseminate that resource locally. But then I made the point that it doesn't need to be local, that we can choose influencers wherever they are and try to get the information out to them. So that was kind of the sum up of our talks.
Thank you very much, Lori, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We're going to conclude now. Thank you again to John Pegg from the Twin Ports chapter for initiating the idea for this and pushing us to try this experimental regional breakout room today. I just, again, want to encourage everyone to contact me. You can email us at info@WorldBeyondWar.org. We have people on our email list in 175 countries worldwide, so most likely there is someone in your area and we can connect you with them and help you with organizing events and campaigns in your communities and webinars like this one. So do reach out to us and we will send the link to the recording of this afterwards as well. So thank you everyone for joining us and have a good rest of your day.